Hello, my name is Chang, and today I'm here with Nancy Ring for Alfa Art Gallery. So, Nancy, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yes, thank you. I'm a visual artist, primarily a painter and an author. I'm based in northern New Jersey. You can check my resume on my website for all the wonderful things I've done career-wise, exhibitions, of course, and the grants and awards and things that I'm so lucky to have received, some public collections that my work's in, etc. Also mentioned I'm an author of a culinary memoir, which I think I'll talk about a little later. And I'm the proud mom of a 22-year-old son who is a musician based in Memphis. I am schooled. I have my master's in painting from the University of the Arts in Philadelphia, where I lived for a time. I also lived in Manhattan for 22 years and popped out here with my son when he was 4, like most cityites who needed more room. And more than that, about me, I've been called an intimist, which is a word coined for me by a favorite mentor who knew my obsession with the small moment.
So, I saw on your website that you spent 4 years at one point in your career working as a pastry chef to support yourself. And as an artist, did that influence your artwork at all?
Yes, I love this question because it's very integral to my person, who I am in life, not just art. My first experiences of handmade things were from my family, many makers in my family, most of them women, and they knitted and tatted and crocheted and embroidered and baked and cooked. Taking their time to make these fine handmade things that all bore the print of the maker, and the obvious signs of hours and hours of careful, patient craft. And even the recipes that they were making that were handed down to me had indications, the fingerprints, the notations of the bakers, all those stories they wrote and told were preserved for me. As someone who loved to bake as a child also. That said, my experience of the world was extremely visual, and I knew I was an artist since I was a child also. At 8 years old, I told anyone who would listen that I was an artist. Not that I wanted to be one, but that I was one already. So the way it affected my artwork eventually was I decided to connect these two things. I love nurturing people with food, and I made for a long time, possibly as much as a decade of work that was still life paintings and installations and performances that were about food.
What do you think your role is in society as an artist?
This is a big question, of course. I have heard that if you are focused, specifically from 2 mentors of mine also, if you're focused on helping others, you can't go wrong. So I believe deeply that art heals. And I think part of what I want to do is bring that healing right now to the world. It needs it so badly, obviously. I do have another friend who says she wants to bring as much love to the world. I have a lot of us talk about wanting to bring poetry to the world. And I think that love and poetry and healing is probably most of it. However, I also want to address some questions that are pressing right now, and through them start a dialogue that would create that healing, such as what are our perceptions of beauty, and why is there only one kind usually in the culture? Why is a certain kind of necessary and meaningful work called women's work? And how do we live in the skin that we're in? Things like that, that I believe are important.
Do you have a moment in your career that you are most proud of and
Yes.
or most doubtful of yourself?
Yes, my most proud moment, I have to say, is when I delivered about 20 bags of food to the New Jersey food pantry after an exhibition I held where part of the show was asking people who came to see the show to bring bags of food for donation.
Mhm.
And this was during the time when I was making work about food. The show was Everyone I've Ever Fed, and it was pieces of fabric I had gathered from everyone in my life I had ever fed, which was a lot of people at that point. And I made an enormous 12-foot by 15-foot apron shape
Mhm.
sculpture, fabric sculpture out of them. And in return for scraps of fabric from visitors to the gallery, I would give them food, or I said, you can bring food to donate. And we got so much food. And when I dropped those bags off, boy, I felt like $1,000,000. The other way that I feel proud of myself in the art world, maybe, but in life in general, is I had a professor who once said to me that I was successful. And at the time, I was not, that was not my perception of successful, because I didn't have the glory, the money, the fame, any of that. And I said, you're crazy. I'm not successful. And he said, no, if you're this age, mid-career, 50s, in your 50s, and you're still making art seriously, that's successful. And I did, at that moment, I kind of filled with a sense of pride about that. And my son told me later, as I mentioned, he's 22 now, a musician. He said, you kind of taught me that without saying a word. And that also made me proud. Second part of the question, most doubtful, absolutely. When I was in grad school, of course, that's the place it usually happens. I had one visiting artist tear me to pieces, say that my work was meaningless and I didn't know what I was doing, etc., like they like to say. And I took everything off the walls and laid down on the floor. And my studio mate at the time came in and saw me there and said, uh-oh. And so it took me a while to put myself back together. But what helped me put myself back together, even filled with that much doubt, that literally I had thrown out everything in my entire studio, lost my way. My mentor at the time handed me a poem. And this was a turning point in my career, actually, because I said to her, I'm painting. Why are you giving me a poem? And she said, go read the poem. So I went and read the poem. I came back and said, well, there's a lot of light and dark in it. There's some color and imagery. It's very beautiful. She said, go read the poem. So obviously that wasn't the lesson. So I went back and read the poem many times, kept coming back to her with my thoughts. And then finally I said to her, the poem works in a really unique way. It resists you. You don't know what it means. You can't quite figure it out. It has multiple layers of meaning. It could mean something to me now, right now, but 10 years from now, it could mean something else. And she said, bingo. That's what you want from your work. It doesn't matter what form it takes. It doesn't matter, what style it is. And nobody can take that away from you. And the last thing she said to me was, follow your instincts. They're always pitch perfect. And that's something that I carried with me. So that brightness came out of a dark time. And there's a metaphor also. The poem, by the way, was W.S. Merwin's Annunciation, if you're curious.
Mhm.
I love poetry.
So, as you've grown and worked as an artist, are there other artists or concepts that you are inspired by?
Yes, I am inspired by so many artists, poets, and writers as well. It's hard to list them all, but I made a list because I often am asked this question. And Anne Hamilton and Janine Antoni come to mind, mostly for their audacity.
Mhm.
Louise Bourgeois comes to mind for the poetry, of course, not literal, but visual poetry. Giorgio Morandi for the deeper and deeper delving into one thing and one thing only. Joan Mitchell for the love of paint and more paint and more paint. Amy Sherald and Kehinde Wiley for using the figure so beautifully. My painting mentor from grad school, her name is Eileen Neff. She's a huge influence on my work. She's a photographer. Also poets, Jory Graham, Yeats, Frost, Jane Kenyon. These are the people I read all the time. Elizabeth Bishop, that's just a few. Clarice Lispector, and who's like Virginia Woolf, stream of consciousness, painterly style of writing. I read like a sponge, obviously. I can't get enough books, and I love many authors too, like Eudora Welty and Sandra Cisneros and Louise Erdrich. I could keep going probably for many years. I also love Nick Cave. He says that he wants to give his viewers the opportunity to dream, and I love that. And right now, anybody that I look at, I'm kind of looking at things that correspond to what I'm thinking about, which is perceptions of beauty, inner states of being. This is what I was thinking about with the painting I submitted to the gallery show, interiority and ephemerality.
That's really nice. I think these are all the questions that we've prepared today, and so a huge thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I don't want to end without thanking the Women's Caucus and Alfa Gallery for this great opportunity. I am thrilled. Thanks so much.
Thank you.